Welcome to the first edition of Impact Fans Speak. This is your host, Robert from Robert Does Wrestling. You can follow me on Twitter at WrestlingRobert. And let's talk about the world of Impact Wrestling. The latest news comes to us from down south in Mexico City, Mexico. We got the big boss, the man who's running Triple A Lucha Libre, Dorian Roldan, saying that he have not ruled out that Lucha Underground wrestlers could appear on Impact Wrestling as long as they are not using the same gimmick as they're using on Lucha Underground. As long as they don't do that, they're good to go. With that begs the question, will we see my fellow Puerto Rican Ricky Banderas, aka Judas Mesias, aka Mil Muertes, show up at the Impact Zone during the next set of tapings? Let's talk about feuds for a minute. One of the feuds that was the spotlight during this whole tapings was Jeremy Borach versus Josh Matthews. The feud started at the beginning of the taping and ended up closing at the end of the taping with the match Team JB versus Team Goat. Team Goat was defeated, and therefore Josh Matthews is leaving the Impact announce table, which is good news for everyone who hated him in the first place. I don't think we have seen the last of Josh Matthews because he's probably gonna return as a manager. I don't know who would be his best pairing, but I don't think Impact will let all the heat that he have just go away. Another feud that we saw at the beginning of the taping, but we didn't saw anything else out of it, was the feud between Moose and Cody Rhodes. The match that they got was not bad at all, but it got a questionable finish by the judge. Therefore, there's still a lot of ground to cover in that feud. Let's talk about debuts for a minute. We saw Rena Scum, good tag team debuting on Impact Wrestling, representing the punk rock culture. We got Callie Conley, Rachel Ellerin, Casey Quinn, Laredo Kid, and Garza Jr. All of them debuting during the first episode of Impact. I see a lot of future in Garza Jr. He got that mainstream appeal. What can hold him down is that he's not that tall, but I see him getting a decent push later down the line in Impact Wrestling. And also during the first episode, we saw the debut of Alberto El Patron, formerly known as Alberto Del Rio, and his debut match was against Bobby Lashley for the TNA Heavyweight title. It was about 20 minutes long, solid match, which Alberto won, but via nefarious circumstances. Therefore, he had to return the title back to Impact Wrestling. Then, on the later episode, he ended up facing EC3 and beating EC3. And his third time he appeared on camera was a squash match. And he also appeared on the latest episode of Impact, being part of Team JB. We later down the taping, we saw the debut of Fala Ba and Mario Bocara. I think those two, there could be something out of them. They're not bad wrestlers. They have a unique look, especially Mario Bocara, who have like a cross MMA background. Another person that is kind of hidden under the radar is Adris Abraham. Adris Abraham was someone that I was not expected to be that popular, especially in the internet culture. I saw his metrics and I was quite impressed by him. I hope Impact is able to take advantage of that and he is shown later down the line during this next set of taping. We also saw KM being part of the whole Braxton Stutter, Allen, Sienna, and Laura Banes gimmick. And we saw also the debut of Congo Kong on Impact Wrestling. A lot of good people making their debut on Impact Wrestling. Most of them are really good, but without the stigma of being ex-WWE wrestlers, which it is really good. We saw Dutch Mantel returning to Impact Wrestling and being for the first time in front of the camera. We also saw four-way title matches being back on Impact Wrestling. That is something that Jeff Jarrett is a huge fan of. We saw Suicide returning to Impact Wrestling and Bruce Prichard, who is kind of the face of the booking team, and he's cutting promos out there and stuff. And he, on his first promo, put the end of the name Impact Wrestling. And we also saw the return of the Latin American Exchange, LAX, with two new guys, one female, and Homicide and Conan. Out of all the people that they got, all of them are truly talented. But I think the Chinese star, no pun intended, is the female wrestler, Diamante. She knows how to carry herself in the ring, and I see a star quality in her. We also saw the return of Garrett Jarrett to Impact Wrestling. Not a lot of fans were waiting for her to be back into the show. As long as she is not being overexposed, I don't have problem with her. But the first time she did the big promo once she returned, it was quite boring. I don't want to see her taking that much TV time, to be honest. And I think people are starting to compare her and her style to Stephanie McMahon wrestling, which is not a good sign at all. Now, let's talk about good news when it comes down to return. We saw the return of the blueprint, the DNA of DNA. Matt Morgan, he's looking better than ever since he had been doing bodybuilding on the pro level. We saw Chris Masters and my man Magnus also returning to Impact Wrestling, which he ended up showing up with the Global Force title. But that is another topic later down the podcast. Storylines on development. We got the end of the DCC. In one of the segments, James Storm ended up attacking Kingston and Bram, so they are on their way out. It is, I'm sorry for that fashion. That had a lot of legs, but it was cut during the changes between the old regime and the new regime. Another storyline in development is the EC3 heel turn, which is still in the making, but we are not sure at all who he is going to betray at the end of the day. Another storyline who have a lot of people intrigued into seeing the end is the Sienna / Laura Banes / Allen / Braxton Stoddard / Congo Kong / KM feud. Ever since Maria left, Sienna have been getting a lot more mic time, and she have been putting one hell of a show. And the Laura Banes gimmick into being a drunk wedding girl have been more than fun, and I want to see what type of stuff they can do back down the line. Let's talk about questionable use of talent. Number one on the list, Rosemary. I don't think the new regime truly appreciates how talented Rosemary is. I hope they don't put the next person I'm gonna be talking about, ODB, over her. I think ODB is not looking that good on the ring. She's getting blown out. I'm not a fan of her comedy matches, and I disagree highly with her getting the number one contender spot. I will have no problem with that if they would put Rosemary over. Someone who had been lost in the shuffle is Eli Drake. I don't think also the new regimes truly appreciate how good he is and they are just trading waters with him being with Tyrus. Hopefully, by this next set of tapings, they put the rocket on him and push him because he is very talented and someone who have a star quality value all over him. Another thing that I highly disagree is the constant use of GAW title belts on Impact Wrestling TV. I'm not a fan of it, and I don't think there's any purpose behind it. Unless you make a clear purpose, that doesn't add up at all and doesn't come across as good on TV. One of the most disliked segments during this whole taping section was Karen Jarrett calling out Sienna to the ring, and Sienna ended up cutting kind of a underhand babyface promo, which was not a good sign to be seen, especially if you want to put Karen Jarrett as the babyface of the Knockouts division. This was a bad segment. I hope they keep Karen Jarrett at bare minimum. Another segment that I didn't like was the Knockouts burial. Seeing Rosemary running away and hiding from the division was not a good sign to be seen, and it didn't help the baby faces by ambushing her. She came across more likely, and the baby face came across as jealous or something like that. That was not a good segment in my opinion. Also, please, Impact Wrestling, how should we refer to this person? As Casey Queen or as Ava Story? The last thing I didn't like about this whole taping section was seeing Trevor Lee in the secondary position and having to hear Shane Helms on the mic. Shane Helms is not a good talker, and Trevor Lee can do all the things on his own. Now let's talk about the bright spots. Sienna on the mic, excellent stuff. Brandy Rhodes in her one night only match versus Santana Garrett, excellent stuff. She now looks more comfortable, at least on that match, and she kind of knows how to follow instruction from a veteran. Let's talk about improvement for a second. We saw Mahabali Shera working really tight and really good as a tag team wrestler, and Rebel is improving a lot in the ring, and she hold up her own during her match at One Night Only and her Impact appearance. Another bright spot was the sit-down interview done by Bruce Prichard to Lashley. I enjoy the way they shoot it, and I enjoy all the things they talk about. Another shining spot on Impact Wrestling is Andrew Everett and his single run in the X division. I still think he needs to lose a couple of pounds, but I think he's ready for his run as the X division champion. One of the things that had me marking out big time was seeing Cowboy James Storm returning to the main event scene and returning to his classic gimmick. And now he's the number one contender, and he's gonna be facing Bobby Lashley the next edition of Impact Wrestling, which is gonna be tomorrow. I hope to see him win, but I'm not sure how the whole thing is gonna play out. But it is good. It is a good sign to be seen the Cowboy James Storm back in Impact Wrestling. He is the last survivor. He is the most loyal soldier in the Impact Wrestling army. So far, the Impact Wrestling feud of the year have been Davey Richards versus Eddie Edwards in their last man standing, and their last man standing match was the match of the tapings. They are still thinking. It seems like this time around they're gonna be adding Alicia and Angelina Love to this whole mix, therefore putting a little bit more different effort and taste during this whole thing. One of the things they have improved a lot ever since Anthem Sports have took over is the tag team division. And we got new champions. We got the Latin American Exchange LAX being the tag team champions. A gimmick that was over the first time they did it, and it is still pretty over at this point in time in 2017. And the last bright spot we saw during the taping was Santana Garrett versus Rosemary. I think Santana Garrett should be signed as soon as possible. She is very talented and very impressive, and she have very good chemistry with Rosemary, and she could end up filling the babyface top spot on Impact Wrestling. I guess everybody who's leaving Impact Wrestling is now going to the WWE. Broken Hardys, the Broken Mad Hardy, they ended up showing up there, and now they have to pay Impact Wrestling for the use of their gimmick. That is something that Dave Meltzer have been reported, and that was the settlement all around between the two companies, which it is a good thing for Impact Wrestling and for the fans of the Hardy brothers. Drew Galloway, aka Drew McIntyre, ended up showing up there, and there's rumors that Mike Bennett, Maria Kanellis, and Jade are all of them going to the WWE. They are taking every single one of the people who are leaving Impact Wrestling. The last departure is Aaron Rex. He's leaving Impact Wrestling to pursue a career in acting. He's not retired, but he have decided to leave the promotion, so I wish him nothing but the best of luck. Let's talk about people that you should be on the lookout. Number 1, the Veterans of War debuted. I have high hopes for them. I hope they make me proud as a veteran. We got MGM Jenkins, another female who is really good, very impressive. I hope they sign her and they pay attention to her. Diamante. She knows how to carry herself. She got that look, and they should be on the lookout to get her near the main event scene. The working relationship between Impact Wrestling and AAA Lucha Libre is growing stronger, and Bobby Lashley, Eddie Edwards, and Davey Richards, all of them are gonna be working Triple Mania this year, which is their biggest show of the year. So those ties are getting stronger. Be also on the lookout of the India taping tour, which should be announced in the next set of tapings. Let's talk about Lockdown for a minute. I am a huge supporter of that pay-per-view. That was the first pay-per-view I saw out of Impact Wrestling back in 2005. So I hope they bring it in this set of taping, because Lockdown is most of the time on April. I think the best feud for that is the Team JV versus Team GOAT, but I'm not planning to see Josh Matthews back on TV because he just left last week. But let's see what type of idea the booking teams comes up with. And to close this podcast, we're gonna talk about rumors, the Impact bound people. We got Desmond Xavier, who is apparently Impact bound, Jade and Dave Christ, who are for Wrestle Circle. They're also Impact Wrestling bound. And one of the NWA champion, Jack Stain, who is a heavy big guy, he's apparently also Impact bound. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. Don't forget that you are also a vital part to this podcast. If you want your voice to be featured here, go ahead and send me an MP3 at ImpactFansSpeak@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to showcase you right here on this podcast, because this podcast is by fans for fans, and don't forget that in your own way, it is time to make Impact great. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.